Welcome to Superhero Grid Drawings. We're going to create a drawing based on various Marvel, DC, and other comic and hero images. I have 12 for you to choose from. There's a PDF for them in the assignments as part of your choice board. So what you need to do first is to pick one of your superheroes. They will print out fine on a regular piece of paper, and they all have a grid illustrated on top of them. Pick which one you like, or maybe one that you're comfortable with. Some are a little more complicated than others. These are all challenging though, and this art assignment probably should count for 2 weeks of working on artwork, not one. So yeah, you need one of these. You need a white piece of paper. We're going to make our own grid on it, and then work a square at a time to draw this drawing onto this paper. You need pencil. You'll need Sharpies, eraser, a clear ruler, or some kind of ruler to draw your grid, but a clear one is great. And another thing that you might want to have handy are just some little squares of paper, and I'll show you what to do with those in the demonstration from overhead. So get your things ready, pick your superhero grid drawing, print it out, and let's get started. The first thing we need to do is make the grid so we can follow the drawing onto our good paper. I'm using a ruler. This is the 9-inch side of the paper, and I'm drawing a little tick mark at every inch, just a vertical straight line above each inch. I'm doing it really lightly because we don't want the grid there at the end. Now that I've done it on each end of the paper, I'm going to connect those lines. That way I know they'll be straight going across, drawing really lightly again with the pencil as I start to make my grid. Once you do one side, you're going to line up the ruler and make those 1-inch marks along the long side up to 12 inches. And the same thing, you're going to line up the ruler with the 2 marks you made and make my way down. And now I'll have the grid on my paper. Light, light, light with the pencil. Now that I have the grid drawn, I can use my worksheet to transfer the grid onto my paper. The little pieces of paper that I said that you could have extra are to block things off. So if you're working on a certain square, it helps you to remember which one you're drawing and where it goes. And you can also kind of just judge where lines are going to continue as well. But you're just going a square at a time. This way you don't have to think about what's in the drawing too much. Sometimes when we don't know how to draw what we see, using the grid is a good aid for us to get a drawing down on paper. Another thing to know, the grids that are on these superhero drawings are 9 by 12. So if you're using paper from a printer or a copier, that paper is 8.5 by 11. So you might want to decide on one row to cut from the top or bottom and half a row to cut from the left or the right side. That way you'll have the same amount of grid on an 8.5 by 11 paper as you do on the picture that you're drawing. The only drawing that doesn't follow that rule is Wolverine. It's a little smaller, so just check the grid. It's time to move on to what would be considered your second art class with this project. Remember that we are working in pencil really lightly. Draw light till you know it's right. The pencil lines are not something that we want to see at the end of this project, especially the ones on the grid. So what you have to do next is work on tracing your lines in Sharpie and erasing the grid and any stray pencil marks, and then you can add color to it in any way that you want. Iron Man is red and gold, but if you wanted to make him different colors, that's fine. And I'm working on Iron Man, and I'm also working on Jubilee. So I picked one that was a little simpler, and by simpler I don't mean simple, but one that was a little more simple to work with, and one that had a little bit more line work to work on, so it was a little bit more challenging. But on both of these projects, I am up to making my grid and recreating the entire drawing, following each square on the grid to get the drawing to go up to the next step. So let's look at what to do next. Now that you've drawn the grid on your good paper and transferred the drawing one square at a time, what you need to do is erase the grid and any stray pencil lines, and then trace your good lines in Sharpie. I use a vinyl eraser, a white plastic eraser, and you can cut it on an angle to have a nice line. I thought I'd also show you a dusting brush. It's something that illustrators use to prevent them from wiping their hand across their drawing all the time. It puts oils from your hand on the paper, and sometimes it'll smudge the pencil or the ink. But just use care if you don't have one. I thought it just might be nice for you to see a tool like that. And then just start drawing your final lines in Sharpie. You can turn the paper to make things more comfortable everywhere that you draw. I tend to like to pull the marker toward me when I draw, so I like to turn the paper so I'm always pulling the marker toward me. It's really up to you. As long as you're comfortable and you can reach, you can turn the paper any way you need to trace those final lines. Okay, so you saw in my demonstration that I was working on 2 images. I wanted to try a couple of them out. I thought the Iron Man image would be a little simpler to do, and I thought Jubilee would be a little bit more of a challenge for me, so I tried each. Here's some things that I want to remind you about. Always use a light touch with the pencil, with the eraser, with the markers. That draw light till you know it's right, it counts throughout this whole lesson. You don't want to draw your grid and press really hard because you want that grid to come off easily with an eraser, and you don't want to have to be really rubbing that paper and risking damaging it after you did all that great work drawing the grid and transferring the drawing over. Another thing that I found was the lines in the drawings that you're working from are pretty thick. So when I started transferring my Iron Man over to my paper, I was noticing that there were places that I wanted to draw both sides of a black area that I was getting ready to draw. But then even some of these lines here, these outside lines, I was drawing both sides of the line, and I figured that I don't really need to because a Sharpie is thick and it makes a strong line. So I would suggest just drawing any outline line with pencil. Don't worry about the thickness of it until you go and work with it with Sharpie. And then for Jubilee, I noticed that since she was more complicated, I was using the fine Sharpie to trace my lines. So you can see her jacket, her facial features, things like that. Even the hair, I went with the fine Sharpie and then colored in carefully. And then I just used the thick Sharpie for all the power and force field kind of stuff, her magic superhero powers that are emanating from her fist. So I made those with the thick Sharpie just to give them a little bit more, to make stronger lines, show stronger power, and they're kind of in front of her, so things closer to you would be bigger. So that's why I chose that for her. After you get your drawings done, I want you to think about how you want to add color to them. They're great as black and white drawings, but there are things you can do to make them your own.